Gabby Petito and her story has been by far one of the nation's most sensational of the year. And each day, more and more information becomes available that continues to enthrall us all. This era of social media we live in has an incredible impact on some of these cases and demonstrates how it has the ability to dictate which ones fall under the spotlight. Gabby Petito has the power of captivation, and after her death, millions of people flocked to her social media accounts to ask where she was, expressing that they hoped that she was safe wherever she was. The ways in which the public became involved was astonishing to see. The story caught fire with the media, and the amount of attention the case has received has even caused some tension within the public due to its own differing opinions regarding some of the controversial subjects, which we'll get onto later. The series of events that led us here have left us all with inquiries about what exactly happened. People even went as far to put their own detective hats on and search for clues through the content that Gabby put out to the world. We're going to do our due diligence composing all of the facts and roll out a timeline for you that stays true to the way things have happened until this current day. Before we even begin to start to discuss the things transpiring now, we must take a look at the earlier days. Without the context and history of who these people are, we're left to make assumptions that may not be true. If you're already caught up on this case, hopefully there may be some bits of information you can take away from this assessment that you wouldn't have otherwise.
Gabrielle Petito was born on March 19, 1999, and brought up in Blue Point, New York. She was the eldest of all four siblings and some half-siblings. Together they made a family of 6, which is quite a full household. Gabby was described as a brilliant artist and a hippie by her mother and father. Specifically, the kind who would wear the round glasses and be at Woodstock if she could have been. A true flower child with an old soul, who loved to draw and had an eye for decorating. Her mother, named Nicole Schmidt, also characterized her as a busy person who did a lot and loved her friends. When Gabby was 14, she and her stepbrothers appeared in a music video that helped spread awareness about gun violence following the Sandy Hook shooting that happened the year before in 2012. Gabby's family seemed to have the kind of moral values that many families strive to have. She always had a zest for life and was a true humanitarian. She cared about the environment and the living creatures that inhabited it. Gabby went to high school at Bayport Blue Port High, which is where she eventually met Brian Laundrie. The two of them were both Long Island natives and ended up bonding with one another, likely from a mutual love of nature and both of them being artists, and they started dating. Although they were infatuated from the start, their relationship has been described as always having been tumultuous by some of their former friends. People magazine had an interview with them this past September, and they gave insight to what the energy between the two of them looked and felt like at the time. Brian Laundrie had a friend named Ben Machula, and as he started to open up, he started recalling the frequent tension that they brought with them everywhere they went, which would inherently have a negative effect on everyone around them. Quote, "There was always something below the surface where things weren't 100% wonderful," Ben stated. Quote, "One minute they'd be all over each other, the next minute he'd be like, 'We're fighting.' They always had some kind of drama," end quote. Ben wasn't the only one who was interviewed by People. Gabby's vlogger friend, Alyssa Chen, who was 23 at the time, said that Gabby's relationship with Brian was consistently on and off again, and was consistently turbulent. There were many ups and downs in their relationship that seemed to be extreme. Chen said at one point, quote, "They had times they were toxic and times where everything seemed a lot healthier." She went on to say, "They had very low lows and very high highs, but they seemed to love each other. When things were good, you'd be like, why can't I have a relationship like that? But when they were bad, you'd be like, oh my God, just break up and spare yourself from the drama and everyone else from having to hear it," end quote. And I think a lot of us at that point in our lives, late teens, early 20s, we all have sort of known a couple like this or even been in a relationship like this. And it's just times where people are trying to find the right person. And I've seen tons and tons of extremely toxic relationships exactly like the one I just described.
Oh yeah, 100%. After Gabby graduated in 2017, she must have broken up with Brian because she moved to Carolina Beach, North Carolina, and worked as a hostess in a kitchen of a restaurant in Wilmington, with aspirations of taking classes at Cape Fear Community College. She applied, but apparently did not attend. The reason why isn't clear, but if it was because she changed her mind, it's honestly a shame. Her life would soon take a very different path, and Gabby would draw up a new blueprint for her goals, which should have been as amazing as she dreamt it to be. Gabby would find her way back to Brian again, and they restarted their relationship on March 17th, 2019. She moved in with him to his parents' house, who lived in Northport, Florida. She would live with his family for about 2.5 years total. Gabby's father did describe her as a free spirit, so the fact that she had finally left her corner of the U.S. must have been exhilarating for her. Gabby decided she wanted to do something different, downsizing her life and becoming a travel vlogger. Brian would also join her by using his own Instagram and document their experience as well. And why not? If your dream is to travel and live your life as an adventurer in your younger years, it would seem that just about everyone has fantasized about living a carefree life, romanticizing the idea of being a nomad. Especially the year of 2020, as tons of people decided that after the onset of the pandemic, they were going to take off and live life on the road, leaving everything behind. Became a really popular theme, especially amongst Gabby's generation. Other people didn't even need to live the life themselves because they would still experience it vicariously through those who did on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube.
Hey, we're on YouTube.
Anxious to start, she and Brian went on their first cross-country road trip in late 2019 until early 2020, driving from New York to California in a compact Nissan Sentra, visiting all kinds of places like Las Vegas, Texas, Pikes Peak in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado, and several locations in California such as Yosemite National Park, Santa Monica, and Pismo Beach. The content they got while traveling in these places was pretty cool. This is apparent after viewing these stories on Gabby's Instagram and TikTok videos. One of them featured a clip of them overlooking the ocean from a Ferris wheel in Santa Monica. Another was a beautiful beach in Malibu on a cloudy day. Their view from hiking up Pikes Peak in Colorado, sand dunes, and really so much more. She documented every highlight during the trip, the delicious food they picked up along the way, the Airbnb they would stay at, an occasional selfie, clips of them just goofing around, roasting marshmallows over a campfire, beautiful landscapes, chocolate-covered marijuana coffee beans they found in Colorado. Whatever the day had in store for them, that's what she wanted to share with the world. In fact, Brian's friend Matula even admitted in his interview with People magazine that he was envious of their lifestyle. He said, quote, "It seemed like they were seeing the world with the person they loved. They were living the dream that all of us want to do, but they were doing it. All of their friends were either still in college or searching for entry-level jobs, and they were out there killing it. I was jealous, and I know I'm not the only one. I was happy for them." End quote.
Following the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, Gabby and Brian quit their jobs at Publix in Northport. She was a pharmacist and Brian worked at the grocery store part. Gabby's birthday would also be coming up in March, and they decided to go and celebrate her turning 21 in Nokomis, Florida. There's a picture of her Instagram of her in Nokomis Groves holding up golden balloons shaped as the number 21. Months later in July, Gabby posted a picture of the two of them eating sushi on the beach, which happened to be from their first date together. In caption, she mentioned that Brian had asked her to marry him, and she said yes. She tagged him and said that he made her feel like life was unreal, and that every day was a dream being with him. It really did appear from the outside looking in that these two had a fairy tale life. Gabby believed that this was only the beginning to her saga, and that she would have the rest of her life to explore all of what the world had to offer her and her growing audience. After reflecting on their first trip, Gabby and Brian realized that to continue living nomadically in a sustainable way financially, they wouldn't be able to keep staying at Airbnbs and spending excessive amounts of money on food, gas, and other necessities. And in general, they also had too much stuff and not enough space in their current vehicle, therefore needing something bigger to accommodate their lifestyle. The solution would be for them to customize their own van, which would be a 2012 Ford Transit Connect that they purchased in December of 2020. It had to have the features that would best suit their passions, which were distance hiking, artistic expression, and travel. Fully embracing the idea of van life, they planned a 4-month trip from June to September across the American West, hitting several national parks along the way. There are a series of stories on Brian's Instagram of he and Gabby working on their van in preparation for the trip. There was a moment in one of the videos where Gabby was gifted a part for the van that they needed by a family member, and she was pleasantly surprised. It was obvious that they had put a lot of time and effort into making this vehicle what they needed it to be, and had the kind of support to help turn their dreams into a reality. The two of them would need lots of money, so they started to save up by getting jobs. Brian got a position at an organic juice bar, and Gabby was averaging 50 hours a week at Taco Bell, and was also working as a nutritionist. On January 12th of 2021, she posted a TikTok of her flipping through a gigantic stack of Polaroid pictures from their adventures on their first trip, telling her viewers to stay tuned because they had big plans for the year 2021. After 6 months of hard work and lots of preparation, they were set course for the journey that would completely devastate the fate of their futures. The van was finally ready to go. It was completely transformed into the perfect cozy living space, and it had Gabby's spirit in every nook and cranny. There were succulents on the dashboard, flowers tucked into the corners, blankets, pillows, and a ukulele on the wall with some other trinkets inside as well. The back doors of the van had tables that folded down for them to use, and it had plenty of storage space. The best part is that the van would only be occupied some of the time, and the rest of it would be spent in the great outdoors in either their tent, camping, or in a hammock. That being said, the van still looked to be quite small. Compared to some of the other vloggers who live this sort of lifestyle, bigger vehicles obviously seem to be the popular choice. One can only imagine what months of being with another person in such close proximity would really be like. The stressful times of making ends meet and encountering obstacles along the way would certainly challenge the strength of the relationship. However, I feel like me and Stefan, we could probably do it.
Let's do it. That's our new channel. June 17th, 2021 was the day of one of Gabby's brother's graduation ceremonies in Blue Point, New York, and Gabby and Brian traveled there to attend it. From that point on July 2nd, 2021, they would embark on their journey together. Gabby Petito's mom, Nicole Schmidt, said during an interview with ABC Australia, quote, "I worried. I told her to be safe. I told her to be aware of her surroundings. Don't trust anybody. But it felt safe because she was with Brian. It felt like she would be okay. I thought he would take care of her." Even Gabby's father admitted that he never saw any red flags with Brian and wasn't concerned. She always wanted to do this. She had planned it out. She knew what she wanted to do. She knew where she wanted to go. End quote. It's easy to see why they would say these things, especially after seeing the videos of the two of them together. One could easily believe they were having the time of their lives and madly in love. He was always smiling for the camera and gave the impression that his temperament was nothing but joyous and compassionate, just like Gabby's. Their first stop would be Monument Rocks in Kansas. Gabby posted a picture of herself in the center of a giant arched rock formation. It made a beautiful frame for the photo. She captioned it, quote, "There's no place like the tiny van we've built." Next would be the Great Sand Dunes National Park, which Gabby claimed to score a spot during just the right time, since someone luckily canceled their reservation for a campsite and space for overnight parking. They had a great location that overlooked the dunes, capturing the magnificence of the landscape. Gabby said that as soon as they got there, she knew she didn't want to leave. There was so much land to hike. This was really an understatement, as some of the dunes have been recorded up to be 750 feet tall. This was perfect for the two, and for the boards they brought with them to surf on the dunes. July 11th would be their last day in Colorado, and the next destination was Utah. This would be where the trip took a turn, and the energy began to shift. All it took was an incident that happened on the road about a month after that would flip the entire trip on its head. On August 12th, 2 phone calls were made to the police. The first witness, named Chris, said during their statement that he arrived at the Moonflower, an organic grocery store, around 4:30 p.m. He saw Brian and Gabby having a dispute and talking, quote, aggressively at each other, and that something had seemed off. He claimed that it appeared they were fighting over Gabby's phone, and that Brian didn't want Gabby in the van. He saw her hitting him in the arm and face because she was trying to get inside. She eventually climbed over him and over the passenger seat. He heard Gabby say, quote, "Why do you have to be so mean?" before they drove away. He couldn't tell if they were play fighting or not, but it definitely didn't seem right.
Yeah, and it seems like it's probably not play fighting if 2 phone calls were made to the police.
The other caller said that he had witnessed abuse from Brian towards Gabby. He said that he was driving by and saw a man that looked to be about 5'6" with a beard slapping a girl. They stopped, ran up and down the sidewalk, and then he proceeded to hit her, hop in the car, and they both drove off. He gave the police directions regarding which way they had gone and the license plate details.
Officers began to track down and follow the van and noticed that they were driving erratically and believed the driver could have been intoxicated. Brian was speeding, going about 20 miles an hour over the speed limit and even hit the curb. It was at that moment the police officer turned on his siren and pulled them over. When he came up to the passenger side, he greeted Gabby, who had the window rolled down, and you could hear her immediately apologize. He asked their names, and Gabby began to cry. The officer asked what was wrong, and she began to explain that she was crying because they had been fighting that morning and were having personal issues. Brian immediately chimed in, saying that it had been a long day. They were camping the day before, which got flies and stuff, that was quoted. Already, this seemed like an odd thing to attribute the source of stress to. Quote, "I'm sorry I hit the bump back there," said Brian. "I was distracting him from driving. I'm sorry," Gabby added as well. The officer then told Gabby to step out of the car so that he could ask her some additional questions away from Brian. Quote, "Want to tell me what's going on?" the officer asked. "Yeah, I don't know. It's just some days I have really bad OCD, and I was just cleaning and straightening up the van before, and I was apologizing to him, saying I'm sorry that I'm so mean, because sometimes I have OCD and get really frustrated. Not like mean towards him. I guess my vibe is like I'm going to be in a bad mood." And that's what Gabby said to the officer. Already from her response, it was clear that she was overly apologetic. This is sometimes a symptom of victim of abuse, someone that has had their self-esteem crushed by a person that they love. Gabby continued to allude to some of the other things that had been happening between her and Brian. She told the officer, "I just had so much work I was doing on my computer." The officer cut her off to ask, "What do you do for a living?" She responded, "I used to work at a juice bar and I used to be a nutritionist, but I just quit my job to travel across the country and I'm trying to start a travel blog. So I'm building myself a website and I've been really stressed and he doesn't believe that I could do any of it. So that's been kind of we've just been fighting all morning." End quote. The conversation between Gabby and the officer moved on, as Gabby told him at one point that Brian wasn't letting her in the car. When the officer asked why, and if it was because of her OCD, she said yes, and because she needed to calm down. However, Gabby said that she was perfectly calm and that she's calm all the time. And it must be noted, this entire time that she has been speaking in his body cam footage, it's clear that she's upset. It can be heard in her voice as well as seen in her body language. The officer speaking with Gabby then said he'd like her to sit in the backseat of his vehicle, but that she wasn't in any trouble. She just needed a moment to breathe and settle down. It was at this time that he made his way back to the van so he could have a chat with Brian. He asked Brian to step out of the car, also making it a point for him to know that he's not in any trouble. Brian begins by explaining that Gabby gets, quote, worked up sometimes, and how he tries to distance himself from her, which is why he got out of the van and walked away. He described what happened that morning, saying, quote, So she's trying to set up her own little website blog, and we really did have a nice morning, but she just got worked up because we were trying to get our day going. As Brian continued to explain where they were trying to go, the officer cut him off to ask about the scratches on his face. Brian said that Gabby had her cell phone in her hand and that he was trying to get the keys from him and he pushed her away. He claimed he was trying to defuse the situation and it resulted in him getting scratched by the phone. The officer pointed out another mark on his hand, which Brian claimed was from a wire. The officer also brought up how they had hit the curb earlier, and Brian blamed Gabby, saying that it was because she grabbed the wheel while screaming, "I can't believe we're getting pulled over." The officer also inquired, "What about the speed? Did she take over the pedal too?" And he responded with, "If I was going too fast, I'm sorry. It was probably from all the adrenaline of seeing the lights flashing and everything. I'm still shaking now. So if I sped up, I'm sorry about that. Or if I was speeding before that, I'm sorry." He continued to babble and apologize, and a lot of the things he was saying didn't really make a lot of sense. He was clearly nervous, and the officer briefly checked him for weapons and asked him to have a seat on the curb.
Next, he made his way back over to Gabby, where another officer was already in the middle of his own questioning. His attention was focused on the mark on her cheek. He inquired about it, asking her if she was hit in the face. He said that it looked like she was, and then noticed another spot on her arm by her shoulder. He said, "That's new, huh?" Gabby glanced at her arm, shrugging, and said she didn't really know. Not letting up, the officer asked to see the other side of her face. "What happened here and here?" He pointed to the spots on her face. I'm not really sure. It happened really fast. I was just trying to get to the back of the car, and his backpack was on his back, and it got me." It seemed like she was refraining from telling what had really transpired, like fearing what she said could incriminate him. "So there's two people that came to us and told us that they saw him hit you, that they saw him punch you," the officer stated. "This has never happened before," Gabby said with a sad smile and looked down, shaking her head. "Well, to be honest, I definitely hit him first," she added. When the officer asked where she struck him, she said that she slapped him in his face. He kept telling me to shut up. The officer was still digging for answers and resumed his questioning. "Did he hit you, though? It would be okay, and we could understand if he did, but we just want to know the truth, whether or not he actually hit you," he stated. Gabby responded, "Well, I guess, yeah, but I hit him first." After the officer asked where, she admitted that Brian had grabbed her face. She did make it clear, however, that he didn't hit her or punch her, and that his nails must have been what had made the marks that appeared on her cheeks. She knew she had a cut on her left side because she could feel it. "Was he drinking? I saw you two hit the curb." Gabby denied this, explaining that the two didn't drink. Instead, she went into detail about how once they saw the lights flash on, she called him stupid and punched his arm. He asked her, "Is he usually pretty patient with you?" Gabby responded, "He definitely gets frustrated with me a lot. He has anxiety too." The officer replied, "Well, that can be a bad combo if you both have anxiety. My ex-wife and I'm only sharing this to help you understand, would feed off each other's anxiety and it would spiral. You know what I mean? It didn't matter how much I loved her. It may be bad for your soul. Just saying. I'm not telling you what to do with your life, but if you know you have anxiety, look at the situations you get in." As he turned his palm towards her, suggesting that sitting in the back seat of his vehicle was what he meant.
The other officer, who has been standing to the side listening, asked, "Quick question. You said you were hitting him in the arm. Did you grab the steering wheel?" Which Gabby denied ever doing. This is one of the first discrepancies between the two stories. After this exchange, he goes back to Brian once again, who is now speaking with the two other men. They once again go over from the beginning, trying to figure out what exactly happened. Brian again explained that it was a combination of a bunch of little things that were creating friction, such as the flies, that they had run out of water so Brian couldn't wash his feet that were dirty so he was barefoot, that they were thirsty, etc. He joked that the officer would likely understand how those things happen in a relationship, and the officer replied by saying he'd been married for 15 years. So Brian was, according to him, suggesting to Gabby that they take a breather and walk away from one another to chill out. He had the keys, and his fear was that because he didn't have a phone, if Gabby had taken off without him, that he would be on his own. As Gabby was trying to take the keys from him, she was coming at him swinging, so in defense, he pushed her away to create distance. The officer agreed that it looked like the scratches on his neck and face could be from Gabby if she were attacking him. As he said this, he made clawing motions towards Brian, depicting her as the aggressor. Brian downplayed his injuries as he chuckled, saying he wasn't complaining about minor scrapes, as he wasn't bruised or seriously hurt. He was fine, but that hopefully she didn't have any complaints about me, haha, Brian giggled. He carried on, and it's interesting to see how Brian was trying so hard to be charismatic and likable, cracking little jokes and attempting to relate with the officers. He told them about the first trip they had, some of the locations they had been to, and what their plans were. He was laughing quite a bit, which was also a little unusual. When comparing his demeanor to Gabby's, the difference really was night and day. One of the officers even asked him if he was normally this hyper, and if he was on any medication. He also asked if Gabby took any medication, and Brian responded saying, "She's just crazy, haha, no, not that I know of." One of the other officers said he had just gotten off the phone with one of the witnesses, and that they clarified what they had saw. He took his co-officer to the side to discuss this. He explained that the witness said he never actually saw Brian hit her, and that she did shove him, but couldn't tell if it was a defensive or an aggressive gesture, and actually broke in the car, crawling all over him to get inside the vehicle. All in all, it appeared that Gabby was the primary aggressor due to the witnesses' stories and the perspectives of Brian and Gabby, according to the officer. The problem was, to avoid taking her to jail would mean that they would have to be separated, which was difficult considering that they lived in the same vehicle. Brian was determined to be the victim. They explained that this situation couldn't be treated differently just because the attacker was a female and that Brian is still innocent. They would need to charge Gabby with a citation and enforce a no-contact order. Brian would need to go into the police department within business hours the next day to fill out a waiver to drop that order. As all of this is conveyed to Brian, and they call him the victim, he actually laughed out loud with a grin on his face. The officer said he didn't want to, quote, take this small 22-year-old to jail, but that he was left with no choice. Brian asked if he could go to jail, and they told him no. He then joked that he was going to take the officer's radio so that he would. Brian said that he didn't want to pursue anything because Gabby was his fiancée and he loved her. He really just wanted to make it all go away, according to him. They took pictures of Brian's injuries for evidence to show the court. Ultimately, they decided not to charge Gabby, but still ended up separating them. If only she could have gone home to her family that night.
On August 17th, Brian flew to Tampa, Florida from Salt Lake City, Utah to obtain some items and to empty and close their storage unit that the two had, and in order to save some money, as they were contemplating extending their trip. On the 23rd, he returned to Salt Lake City to reunite with Gabby, who had been staying at a hotel for the time being. They both checked out the following day. From what everyone knew, they were sharing expenses and budgeting at all times, so it made sense that they needed to cut corners where they could. 2 days later, on August 19th, a video was uploaded to their YouTube channel, Nomadic Static, which was titled Van Life, Beginning Our Van Life Journey. It was really a work of art, and it is the ultimate compilation of those special moments in their lives that Gabby lived for. Having watched it for the millionth time now, I can say it has a way of evoking new emotions each and every time. Whether it's from the chill music in the background, the moments of them having fun together, Gabby running on the beach, or hearing the sound of their voices, the video reaches that part of your soul that really makes you feel things. Today it has an incredible 6.5, almost 7 million views. On August 27th, a phone call was made to police by a Louisiana couple that was vacationing in Jackson, Wyoming. They described Gabby and Brian to be in a, quote, commotion as they were leaving a Tex-Mex restaurant called the Merry Piglets. Nina Angela was dining there with her boyfriend. She said she saw Gabby in tears and noticed that Brian was very angry. He stormed in and out of the restaurant several times and was rude to all the staff and hostesses. He was being aggressive and apparently arguing with the staff about money. Gabby later returned to the restaurant in tears, apologizing on behalf of Brian's behavior. The manager at the establishment also said she witnessed, quote, an incident, but declined to give her name or any of the details about what had transpired. She also claimed that there was no evidence of the encounter because there were no surveillance tapes available. Gabby had always made an effort to keep in contact with her family, sending them updates and sharing stories of her adventures on the road. However, that communication stopped abruptly the last week of August. She FaceTimed her mom on August 24th, explaining that she was leaving Utah and headed towards Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming, as well as Yellowstone. 3 days later, her mom said that one of the texts from Gabby stated, quote, "Can you help Stan? I keep getting his voicemails and missed calls." The message raised suspicions by her mom, as Gabby would never have referred to her grandpa by his first name like that. They continued to text back and forth, and her family believed she was still in the park at this time. Her final text was on August 30th. However, her mother is hesitant and didn't believe that this message was actually from Gabby. It simply read, "No service in Yosemite." To create even more doubt, a public claim from a woman named Miranda Baker said that she and her boyfriend had picked Brian up from hitchhiking in Coulter Bay, Wyoming, and gave him a ride on August 29th. Brian allegedly told him that he had been camping by himself for multiple days at a campsite outside of Grand Teton National Park, near the Snake River, while Gabby was working for several days on their social media posts back at the van.
During their time together, Brian discovered that the couple was actually headed towards Jackson Hole instead of Jackson. As a result, he became agitated and asked them to pull over, getting out of the car near the Jackson Dam around 6:09 p.m., less than an hour from being initially picked up. Brian offered her $200 for the ride, which was only about 10 miles or so. She also found it strange that he didn't appear to look very dirty, despite claiming that he'd been hiking for days. To further validate this story, Norma Jean Jalovec, a seasonal Wyoming resident, also made a public claim that she had picked up Brian up near Jackson Lake Dam on the exact day of August 29th and gave him a ride to Spread Creek. Along the way, Brian told her that he and his fiancée had a travel blog and that she was in the van at the camping area working on that blog. So he had been hiking along the Snake River embankment for a few days. When they arrived to the entrance of the camping area, she offered a couple times to take him farther, but that he insisted on being dropped off at the front. He offered her gas money, and she refused. An interesting detail in her story is that when she first offered to pick Brian up, it was approximately 6:15, which happened to be a mere 6 minutes after the time Miranda Baker said Brian had departed her vehicle. On September 1st, Brian came home to his parents in Northport, Florida, alone without Gabby. After a few days, he and his parents decided to go camping at Fort DeSoto Park in Pinellas County, Florida. 10 days later, on September 11th, Gabby's mother decided to officially report her as a missing person. Brian would refuse to speak with authorities who were attempting to gather information regarding her whereabouts that very same night. Brian would be named the sole person of interest, as he was the only one that was known to have spent time with Gabby and was the last person to see her. Not only that, but he had nothing to say before or after the time Gabby was declared missing. Brian's parents even hired a lawyer and denied to speak with anyone regarding the case due to his advice. This was extremely frustrating for investigators, as they had no choice but to keep an eye on the home at a distance. Police sought for about a week to interview Brian about Gabby, but was nowhere to be found. They didn't hear from Brian's parents until he disappeared. Police continued to search for weeks in the Carlton Reserve after his parents told him that he had went hiking there, and that he didn't take his wallet or his phone. An interesting fact to note is that this was not the same phone he had while he was with Gabby during their trip, but a brand new one he had purchased after he got home. On September 13th, police observed him leaving his home and returned 2 days later. They later held a news conference and told reporters that they knew where he was. Unbelievably, it wouldn't be until September 17th that Brian's parents reported him as a missing person. It was at that moment police realized that there had to be a mistake in misidentifying Brian. It was actually his mother that they saw exit the car and walk inside the house. She was wearing a baseball cap, and police claimed that she had a similar build to Brian. According to the FBI, the Laundries initially told them that Brian had left to go hike with a backpack on September 14th, but later changed that date to the 13th, the day that police witnessed him leaving the home. A federal search would begin, and this is what would kick off the national attention and inspire people to do what they could to help. Based off of the information that was given by his parents, the search for Brian would be conducted at the Carlton Reserve in Venice, Florida, which contained approximately 80 miles of hiking trails and 25,000 acres. A team of 50 law enforcement officers, along with the FBI, would be covering these grounds, determined to locate him for questioning. The other major search for Gabby was simultaneously happening back in Grand Teton National Park, which is where her mother believed she still was.
On Saturday, September 18th, a woman named Jen Bethune, who was a fellow travel vlogger with a family YouTube channel called Red, White, and Bethune, was editing footage from one of her videos and decided to take a break. She looked down at her phone and noticed that she had received a notification saying that she had been tagged in a story. It read, "If you were in the Tetons on the 27th of August, please review any footage or pictures from that time period, as this was Gabby and Brian's last known location together." With chills running down her spine, she went immediately back to her laptop to go and watch the GoPro footage she had of that day. Lo and behold, she saw Gabby's van sitting on the side of the road that they had passed by. The reason that they had noticed the van to begin with was because they spotted that it had Florida plates, which is where they were from. They stopped so that they could introduce themselves and say hi, but had quickly realized that the van was dark and no one seemed to be inside, so they moved on. Another witness gave the activities an exact location of a white van, which met the description of Brian and Gabby's, as well as her report of a generic young white man acting, quote, weird, near the Spread Creek camping area on August 26th through 28th. She also documented her observations on her TikTok, which would also end up assisting the FBI into heading in the right direction. The following day, on September 19th, remains were discovered in a remote area of the Grand Teton National Park that matched the description of Gabby and were later confirmed by the autopsy report by Coroner Brent Blue. Her cause of death was strangulation. It was also determined that her body had been out in the wilderness for at least 3 to 4 weeks. Days after her discovery, an arrest warrant was issued for Brian due to his unauthorized use of someone else's debit card, which we can assume was likely Gabby's. It was used to obtain about $1,000 or more just before he came out of the home on the 1st. After Gabby was found, people were eager to find Brian more than ever before. Celebrities including John Walsh, Dog the Bounty Hunter, and Nancy Grace had all adopted the case and intended to take it upon themselves to ask their followers and fan bases to help find Brian Laundrie. Dog the Bounty Hunter came knocking on the Laundrie's front door, but no one answered. Interest in the manhunt took flight, and at one point, people in Florida were Googling Dog's name more than Gabby's. Some people were poking fun at his involvement, and others were just grateful that he was trying to do something about it.
I also just love how Dog the Bounty Hunter just goes to their house. I mean, what does he expect? To just go to their house and like, hey, what's up? It's me, Dog.
Aloha, bros. I've come to save, to help. I don't know what he was thinking he was going to do, but he showed up. Insider News reported that Dog the Bounty Hunter said that he had left the search for Brian Laundrie and went back to Colorado after injuring his ankle. Late in October, Dog did an interview with John Benson and said that he decided to stay in Florida after returning because he couldn't bring himself to leave, so he continued his search there. During the interview, Dog repeated the phrase, quote, strangulation is not an accident. He finished by saying, quote, Brian, make a deal and turn yourself in now. Even Brian's sister would urge him to do what was right and report himself to the authorities.
John Walsh, who has recovered 61 missing children and 1,420 fugitives in 45 countries, revealed solid tips from his hotline on Brian's potential location in a new special called Gabby Petito ID Special Report. At one point he said, "We've got people from all over the world calling saying that Martians got him and took him to another planet, and also that he's hiding inside of an alligator in a Louisiana swamp." Walsh talked to a Florida medical examiner named Patricia Oronica, who revealed in the show that manual strangulation is a very personal way to kill someone. Walsh later added, "I absolutely believe his family are helping him stay on the run." And he would not be alone in this theory. People were harassing the Laundries, throwing laundry on their lawns, and holding protests in Gabby's name in front of the family home. Brian's father was even seen in recording mowing the lawn and completely ignoring those who were shouting the question, "Was your son involved in strangling Gabby?" People wanted answers, and they were stopping at nothing to get them. Elizabeth Smart, who was once a victim herself, and also happened to be a case that became sensational nationwide, made an appearance on the YouTube show The Red Table Talk. She oversees a foundation named after her and advocates for child safety. Its goals include bring hope and end the victimization and exploitation of sexual assault through prevention, recovery, and advocacy. She began to open up by saying that the worst part for her parents during her disappearance was not knowing if she was alive or not. She recalled asking her kidnapper if he was going to rape and kill her, and if so, to do it fairly close to her house because it was important to her that her parents would easily be able to find her body and know that she didn't run away. Weeks into the search, Michael Mcpherson, the special agent in charge of the FBI Tampa Division, did a speech at a press conference to reveal some big news. He began saying, quote, "Good afternoon. Earlier today, investigators found what appears to be human remains, along with personal items such as a backpack and a notebook belonging to Brian Laundrie. These items were found in an area that up until recently had been underwater. Our evidence response team is on scene using all available forensic resources to process the area. It's likely the team will be on scene for several days. I know you have a lot of questions. We don't have all the answers yet. We are working diligently to get those answers for you." Brian Laundrie's family were somewhat responsible for this discovery, as the night before the articles were found, his parents had said that they wanted to search for him at a trail he would frequent near Myakkahatchee Creek Environmental Park. After a brief period of time, they would run across Brian's possessions. People would find this suspicious, questioning just how involved his parents were with the way things were playing out. Did they know where Brian was going in the first place? And why is it that immediately after deciding to go out and search, they found evidence?
The next day, on October 21st, a police spokesman announced that a comparison of dental records had officially confirmed that the remains were that of Brian's. The items that were left behind had been there for some time, and the clothes were consistent with what Brian was believed to have been wearing. His cause of death couldn't be determined by autopsy, and were handed over to an anthropologist for further examination. The latest information regarding what happened was confirmed by CNN, stating that Laundrie's attorney told them Brian died from a gunshot to the head, which validated many people's belief that he had committed suicide. It's unlikely that Brian's parents will be charged in any relation to Gabby's death, since Brian was the only suspect. However, if it happens that the Laundries purposely led police to give Brian time to get away, that would be a different story. No one knows as of right now if this is the case. And until then, they are presumed to be innocent. This concludes everything we currently know about this case. There are so many sources of information still available out there, and more of it continues to surface each day. Thanks for listening. We really appreciate you guys. 50K, tell all the stepmoms out there.
And we'll see you next week.
Dog came knocking on the Laundrie's front door. I'm the dog.